I read the story this week of Sarah. Sarah lived in a small, impoverished village in West Timor, Indonesia. She was the youngest child, and much of the family responsibility fell on her. And when Sarah was just a young teen, she had a huge fight with her father, and she ran away from home. She met a man who was willing to help her. It was the only option she had, and she didn't know he was a human trafficker. He took her to a holding facility in Indonesia where she stayed for 2 weeks before she was taken to Malaysia. It took 6 weeks to travel from Indonesia to Malaysia in crowded, cramped, hot, dark conditions. Once she arrived in Malaysia, she worked for a week as an indentured servant, a house help in someone's home. But then she was taken to a Chinese restaurant in Malaysia where she was forced to live and work in the back of the restaurant, both live and work, for years before she escaped. Human trafficking is defined as the exploitation of a person for labor, for services, or for commercial sex. There are 2 main types of human trafficking. There is sex trafficking, which we often think of as prostitution. But one of the things we don't think of with sex trafficking is selling young girls into marriage. And the research I did this week, in some areas, it's as young as 9 or 10 years old. Parents who can't pay the bills and can't feed their family, but a dowry for their daughter will give them enough money. So they sell their daughter to an older man at 9, 10, 11 years old. Unthinkable. There's labor trafficking, which is the coercion of people into forced labor to pay a debt or some other form of coercion. Here's how it works. Someone pays your transport out of the country, and you work for them to pay it back. But there's a huge fee involved as well. The fees and the costs are so great, and the pay is so minimal that there's no way you're ever going to get out. You're stuck in that situation forever. In many places, they even take your ID and your passport so that even if you were to escape, there's nowhere you could go. Usually it's in the sex industry, or in manual work, or in factory work. Sometimes drugs are even given to young women as a way of hooking them, addicting them, so that they become dependent on the perpetrator. Now they have to stay. They become literal indentured servants, modern-day slaves, so to speak. Statistics say 4 million modern-day slaves worldwide. 4 million. 1 in 4 is a child. Human trafficking happens everywhere. We'll talk about that, but it's most noticeable in Asia. Our focus is on Southeast Asia, but in Asia itself, it's said that 73% of all the human trafficking in the world comes from Asia. 73%. I was in Kathmandu on my sabbatical, as you all know. On my second night there, the first night I was too tired and went to bed. The second night there, I decided to go exploring. And I went into a club that said it was a dance club. And I went into it, and it was actually a really fun evening. They had dancers. It was not a dance club like a disco. It had dancers, and all the dancers were men and women in Nepali indigenous costume doing Nepali indigenous dancing. It was quite enjoyable. As I sat there enjoying my first Nepali beer, a young woman came over to talk to me and sat by me. She wasn't just friendly, I knew that. She was beautiful, looked probably 18 or 19. Frankly, with all that makeup, she could have been 14 or 15, I don't know. I wasn't real interested in talking, for obvious reasons, so she left. I saw her talk to a bunch of other girls. They must have thought that maybe she just wasn't my type, so within about 45 seconds, another girl came over and sat next to me, and she started a conversation too. That's what it's like in Southeast Asia. There is not a day you can walk through the Tamil district of Kathmandu. Let's be honest, not a block you can walk in the Tamil district of Kathmandu without being offered everything from LSD to heroin to pretty ladies over and over and over. Chances are, the girls who approached me that night, it wasn't their choosing. Chances are they had a job to do. Now, individuals of any demographic can be affected by human trafficking. The most prevalent figures, from what I've understood and read, the most prevalent factors that contribute to victimization is vulnerability. Traffickers exploit vulnerabilities to gain power and control over victims, ultimately for their own profit. Common risk factors that I found listed were poverty, homelessness, substance abuse, prior sexual or physical abuse, lack of family support, and no work opportunities. And it's not just in Southeast Asia. It happens right here too. I learned this week that Maryland is one of the top 10 states for human trafficking in our nation. Maryland, one of the top 10 states for human trafficking. Why? The Frederick County Human Trafficking Task Force, yes, we have a Frederick County Human Trafficking Task Force, it's that bad, says it's mostly due to our location and our access to major highways and major airports. Another challenge for Maryland is that up until just 2 years ago, maybe not even 2 years ago, I believe it was in the fall of 2019, not even 2 years ago, we did not have a safe harbor law in Maryland in place. A safe harbor law means that a minor who is a minor who is caught in illegal sex activity is not treated legally. She's diverted, or he is diverted to welfare systems for help. Until we had a safe harbor law, the law said that any child under the age of 18 was arrested and treated as a criminal. Those laws now, thankfully, have changed. Rather than a legal response, these kids received immediate referral to child welfare services, which is exactly what needs to be happening. Prior to this, a runaway who was stuck in prostitution because she found help from the wrong guy was put in jail and now a felon. Currently, in Maryland, there are only 2 residential service providers in the entire state for children who are survivors of human trafficking. Only 2. Why is this a church issue? Why are we talking about something that's, quite frankly, a little bit uncomfortable? I have to tell you, I had an ick factor all week long researching for today's sermon. There's nothing pleasant about this discussion. Why is it important for us in church? Why do we even talk about this as a denomination? Because it's a theological issue for us as well. People are exploited when they become commodities. Commodities are things we buy and sell. Commodities are things that have value for either the buyer or the seller, right? Cars are commodities. Clothes are commodities. Jewelry, computers, electronics are commodities. Homes are commodities. They're bought and sold to benefit both the buyer and the seller. The problem is that the sex or the work is not itself the problem. The problem that it's the dehumanization, it's that commoditization of human beings that is the sin. Like with the caste system, the Dalit we talked about 2 weeks ago, people are made to be less than. In this case, they're made to be less than human. They're commodities to be bought or sold and used for the benefit of someone else. In today's reading, and I kind of struggle, I'll be honest with you, I struggle with which readings to pick for today because I could pick one of any dozens and dozens of readings in the Bible that address the issue of humanity. Which ones do you pick? In the reading, Paul tells us that we are all part of the body, each with gifts. The inference there is that none of us are dispensable. None of us are throwaway. None of us are less than human. And we need to face the fact that in a large part of our world, women and children are often considered to be non-entities. In the gospel today, we see Jesus touching and healing, seeing people as a sheep without a shepherd. And all who were touched by his cloak were saved. All. Not those who were worthy, not those who could afford it, not those who were deemed acceptable. All. Why? It's antithetical. It's antithetical to the teaching of Jesus to dehumanize another person, to make someone less than you, to make them a commodity to be bought and sold and used for our own benefit. It's entirely against everything Jesus taught. Why? It's the bedrock of our theology. We are created from the very chapter of the Scriptures in the Imago Dei, the image of God. That is the foundation of our theology. We are created in God's image, right? God created us and said, "It is very good." Everything else was good. Let us create humankind in our image, and it was very good. We are created in the image and the likeness of God. That is the bedrock of our theology. That is the foundation of who we are as a people. And so we as a church see others who are treated as less than, as subhuman, as things to be bought and sold. Our only response can be to scream out that that's unjust, it's not right. What differences can be made? The House of Hope in East Timor gives education and awareness so that young girls and women know what they might be getting themselves into. They know who may or may not be in their best interest. They have job placement and training for women who have been rescued from sex trafficking. There are safe houses and safe transit. There's drug rehabilitation. There's HIV/AIDS education. And there's prevention and protection from human trafficking. In Nepal, there's Shared Hope, a women's investment network where they train women who've been involved in human trafficking as victims. They train them in any number of handicrafts to give them a job, to give them a livelihood, and then they provide stores all throughout Nepal. I saw any number of these stores, and the big sign said, "Women's Crafts." And everything in that store was made by a woman who received training so she could provide for herself and her family. Because many of these women who have been sexually trafficked now have children to care for as well, which makes them even more of a victim and makes their way out even harder. There's the Diocese of Durgapur in our church in India. We have joined what's called the Church of North India. They have 6 centers where 350 kids are able to come and be cared for and schooled and fed and loved and nurtured. Why is that important? Because families who can't afford their children can bring them there and not sell them into human trafficking. It keeps them safe. Why are we talking about such uncomfortable things in worship? Why can't I just talk about Jesus and make us feel good? I wish I could. Because the Scriptures are really clear. People are not things to be exploited for our benefit. And when that happens, we need to stand up and say no. And part of that is just education. Part of that is my responsibility as your pastor to give us the opportunities to have tough conversations and maybe to raise issues that we haven't thought about before. I never thought about these issues the way I did this week, getting ready for today, particularly about Maryland. When we use our gifts, when we use our voices, when we use our power to honor the least, the last, and the lost among us, Jesus says, we honor the Imago Dei, the image of God in which they were made. Amen.